Okay. So yeah, welcome everyone to our second speaker in the speaker series. And in a way, this is kind of our first speaker in the main speaker series. So we just had the one set of talks prior to the annular eclipse. And we wanted to do that because the information they were sharing was important for those of you who wanted to do the eclipse soundscapes project during the annular eclipse. But Dr. Gong is the first speaker for our main speaker series that we'll be doing between now and the eclipse. We might do a couple of talks after the eclipse, but for the most part, we want to do them between now and the end of the eclipse. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Marissa Sad, who will give an introduction for our speaker, Dr. Ji Gong, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Gong. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Marissa.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, everybody. Again, welcome. I'm super excited to introduce our first planned speaker, and that is Dr. Gong. And she started here at NASA Goddard as a co-op scientist in 2012, right after the completion of her 2-year postdoc training at JPL. She joined the civil service in 2022. Dr. Gong's focus is on the atmospheric science research, and she's a subject matter expert for NEBP. She completed her undergrad degree at Peking University and her PhD at Stony Brook University. In her spare time, she loves spending time with her 2 kids and husband at the swimming pool, hiking, reading, watching movies, and taking vacations around the world. So I will pass it off to Dr. Gong. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa, and thank you, Angela. It's an honor to be here and kick off the new series, and just want to say Happy New Year to everyone. I see a lot of familiar names and new names, and I hope this talk is being general and inspiring to the young scientists as well as the educators and other senior people that you could maybe use part of them to inspire your students in the future. So I'm going to touch base on the NASA mission life cycle. It's just mostly based on my experience. And of course, I took it in NASA regarding the mission life cycle. So it could be really biased just toward my experience. And feel free to interrupt me or put your question in the chat. I can't read the chat, so it's great if you could put it in the chat. I can try to answer maybe at near the end. Okay, so my career path, first a little bit about my career path. So I did my K-12 education in a small city in China. I wanted to become a scientist at a very young age, like 2nd grade. That's because my uncle was the first generation college graduate from our family. And when he brought back his PhD thesis from Stockholm University, I couldn't understand any word because it's written in Swedish. But I think I was just amazed and want to become a scientist just like my uncle, and he's a chemist. So, but eventually I chose physics major, and I attended School of Physics in Peking University and majored in atmospheric physics. And that's where my career starts to build. And I also got a double major in economics, and it was actually a painful experience because I need to take classes always during the weekends. But who knows, someday maybe I could use my knowledge about economics in my career, right? And my first ever airplane ride was from China to US. I have 2 suitcases with me. I have $2,000 from my parents and a beloved boyfriend, which luckily turned into my husband later on. And I got my PhD from Stony Brook University, and my thesis was about atmospheric gravity waves used in radio sound data. So that's why this team see my value and can be involved in this study. I really much appreciate it. And later on, after graduate, I did my postdoc at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab in California. I switched gear at that time to satellite remote sensing of cloud. First to gravity waves and then gradually to clouds because my supervisor is focusing on studying clouds. So naturally, I changed my subject as well. And then later I moved to NASA Goddard and lived in Maryland ever since. And I'm currently the ice cloud and snow algorithm lead for 2 NASA missions. One is the LOS radiometer and one is called the PULSAR mission. And I'm also a co-I on an international instrument called the Ice Cloud Imager. So that's a little bit about my life. So as some warm-up questions, I want to give you like science-ball type of questions. How well do you know NASA? You can put your answer or your best guess in the chat, and I can see it. Okay, so the first question, how many NASA centers in US? Let me see what number you want to put in the chat. Anyone? Yeah. Yeah, I see a lot of numbers ranging from single digits to double digits. That's all very close. So there are right now 12 centers and one lab. The lab is Jet Propulsion Lab, and of course the headquarters in DC. And there are also 6 facilities. So some centers you heard of it, like the Houston Space Center, where they train the astronauts, and the Kennedy Space Center, where they launch a lot of space missions. And some of them you may not heard before, but you can do a little bit of research and see what they're working on. All of them support NASA missions. Okay, so the second one is, what things does NASA do now? Of course, NASA do science, but that's not at the very beginning when NASA was built. That was mainly for the purpose for space race, right? But later on, NASA switched gear and to do a lot of leading world science. And also they do, from the space holder, you can see they do aeronautics. They do space mission, launch satellites to space, and we invent a lot of new cool gadgets. So that's the technology development and also exploration, basically searching life in the deep space, in other planets. And the third question is, how many different engineer types do NASA hire? And that's also a number question, so feel free to put your guess in the chat. Okay, I see 8, I see 30, lots, yeah, lots. Yeah, so the number is actually between 8 and 30, it's 20. So I at the very beginning, I don't even know there are so many engineer types existing in the world, and I'm surprised that NASA actually hires so many different engineer types. So if you're doing engineer as your major, possibly, very likely, you can always find a suitable position in NASA. Okay, the last question, how many science areas do NASA invest in nowadays? So that's also a number question. You can make a guess. So of course, earth science, that's where I come from. That's one science subject. And yeah, from the space order, you can see, yes, you're correct. So yeah, 5 major science area that you probably more or less heard of. Earth science is one of them. Heliophysics is study the relationship between Earth and the Sun. And solar system is the science study our neighbor planets in the solar system. And also astrophysics, we want to know like what does the universe form, what's it's gonna become, right, in the future. And one last area is the biological and physical science that's newly invested in NASA. So if you have watched the movie Mars, the Martian, or you read the book, you're probably aware that the astronaut grow potato on Mars, and that's actually what NASA are doing. They try to grow potato on different planet and in the planet-like environment. So I'm just to give a brief diagram showing the different the mission fleet in different science categories. So of course the Earth science has the majority of the missions. The ones in orange are already implemented or built, but they haven't been launched yet. They will be launched really soon. And the yellow ones are just recently funded. They're still in feasibility study, and some of them are going to be launched in the future, depending on the progress. And the 3 ones that I'm involved in are just circled, but I'm also worked with other missions. For example, the Aqua and Terra and Aura mission, that's the data that I used when I was doing my postdoc at JPL. First time ever experiencing satellite data, I was using these very successful mission to advance the science. And also you can see Helio mission that study the relationship between the sun and the earth. So you can see a lot of them flying between the sun and the earth and in the magnetosphere. So they can study the sun's impact to Earth's magnetic field. So the ones I highlighted are the ones that could be used to study the gravity waves mainly in the upper troposphere. So you could imagine when the moon blocked the sun, then the response in the atmosphere are relatively strong, and these missions can be used to analyze the upper atmosphere response. And these are the planetary missions. You may heard of the OSIRIS-REx that came back in last fall. They kept a sample from the asteroid Bennu, and the scientists are really curious to know why Bennu is the very weird shape. So they flew this mission, tried to capture a sample and return it back. So we're excited about this mission. And astrophysics mission, the most famous one right now is the James Webb. You probably heard of it. That's like a much better upgraded version of the Hubble telescope, and it's sending back millions of images every day, helping us understand the universe. And the biological and physics science mission, that's new, and a lot of missions on the horizon. So now come to the main theme. How does a NASA mission formulate? So here I just show the whole diagram, and I'm gonna go through step by step. So it should always start with a very good science idea. So in terms of start with a brilliant idea, it's very similar to your project or the team project, that you always want to start with an idea, and then you develop your whole project paper or proposal, and try to reach your goal, and eventually you come back and get to the conclusion whether the thing you developed answers your original question or not, right? So that's very similar, but how does NASA make sure that idea then developed into millions and millions dollars of mission, and then how to make sure the taxpayer money is not wasted? The mission tries to be as successful as we can, and then eventually comes back into feeding into the science field. So I'll first start with the science idea and with what I have experienced, which is the submillimeter bands. So here is a diagram showing the different frequency band that the remote sensing or most of the remote sensing are using the band. So some of them you are familiar, the visible band or the thermal band and the microwave band. So the visible band has very small wavelengths. That means it's interacting with the cloud particle because cloud particles are relatively small. That's where you can see the beautiful like whipped cream from a hurricane top from the visible band. But you cannot see through the cloud because it's easily blocked by the cloud. Then you can use the thermal band because the wavelength is a little bit longer, so it goes a little bit deeper. But then you care about the precipitation, right? The thing fall on the ground because it's gonna bring huge societal impact. Like this hurricane, it brings a enormous economic loss to the Houston area. And so you have to use the microwave band because it has longer wavelengths, so it's interacting with the large particles like the snow or the rain, and then you can see the rain bands and you know where it's going to precipitate heavily. Excuse me. So these are the two broader bands that we're using nowadays, a lot of techniques. However, there are missing parts. That's how to connect the cloud with precipitation, because that's kind of continuous physical processes, but we actually missing this observational gap here, which is the far infrared band and the submillimeter band. So that's what I highlighted here. So the motivation originally is very straightforward. So the first, we want to understand the cloud and precipitation processes, but at the same time, we find there's a big gap, which we want to have some channels there to help us understand the cloud and the precipitation processes. So that's very legitimate questions, but also there's doubts in these science questions. The first thing is the atmospheric opacity, because if you look at the line here, the curves here, atmosphere is almost transparent to some band. So the opacity is near zero. that's suitable for you to measure atmosphere like cloud or precipitation. But in the far infrared and sublimited band, atmosphere is very opaque. So one would doubt whether we can actually see through the atmosphere. So that's a very legitimate doubt. And also, we engineers care whether the technologies are ready to make an instrument in these bands. So the next thing, it comes to the science asks question to the engineer whether we can make these instruments. So I brought this poster from a movie, which basically says you can't have everything, right? So the first question engineer would ask scientists is which band do you want exactly, which frequency do you want, which footprint do you want if you fly it on the satellite, and which noise level that you can accept. You can have everything, like if you want to, marry a husband or marry a wife, you want your your spouse to be good at everything, but you can't have a perfect spouse, right? So you got to prioritize like what things you can accept, what things you cannot. So scientists need to do a lot of simulation. We call simulation basically experiments to understand which frequency bands are most important we want to measure. And but however, we don't necessarily have a good knowledge of. So we have to do a lot of simulations and make a lot of assumptions. And in the meantime, engineers are not just sitting there waiting for answers. They search the inventory, they search the things on the market and let you know if your ideas are too crazy, too above the time, or it might be achievable. If you're lucky and the answer is achievable, then you can start to design an instrument. So now that comes to the designing phase, okay? So the designing phase, so far everything is on the paper, right? So basically the simulations by scientists and design by the engineer, they can be done voluntarily or through the existing funds that you can deviate a little bit and do something that you're interested in. But if you want to put it into concrete, real things, then you have to persuade people to give you money, right? To build things, you cost money, sometimes a lot of money. So luckily, most of the NASA centers have internal fundings to support innovative or durable ideas. And NASA has other venues to support the public to do innovative and doable ideas. So it's very important to sell your ideas. Sometimes it takes years. So you try to persuade as many people as possible to stand on your side and advocate for you. And you need to do more demos to prove it's a great and important idea, and it can be done. Very importantly, it can be done within the budget range. You cannot propose something that is super expensive, that the Congress wouldn't approve that, right? So that's very important at the very beginning. So I would think that the NEBP is a great example. So if I just grab the screenshot from the NEBP website, if you haven't read the stories, I truly encourage you to go there and read the stories from previous Eclipse campaigns, where you can see step by step how the NEBP grows into from a relatively smaller project into a big national-wide project. And also, at the very beginning, there was not a very clear science motivation, but then the science motivation was introduced, and which really helped the growth of the entire mission. So NEBP is a really great example, and I would encourage you to read the stories behind it. Okay, and then this is just a screenshot from the NASA ESTO, which is a very great venue to get your idea funded. So it funds innovative ideas, not only from hardware like the middle one showing you, but also software. So how do you combine different measurements, satellite measurement, into integrated system for decision making, to identify disasters? And how do you use new software technologies like machine learning to identify climate change, which area in which aspect? That's climate change. So there are very innovative ideas and got funded by NASA. Okay, so now we're getting lucky. We get some seed funding. We can build a demo. Now what can we do the next? Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot this step. So now we got funded, and then we can start to build the instrument. Then the engineers are really involved, and that's why I can see NASA why they're hiring 20 different types of engineers, and you can always find a place where your specialties, your expertise can be really contributing. This is just a diagram showing you the interactions between different engineer components of building an instrument. So some of them you're familiar with, like optical, which is the core to observe, to make the observation. And also the propulsion is basically building a successful aircraft to launch your instrument, right? And the communication, that's super important that you get the data from the satellite. The thermal, that's controlling the temperature, not harm, your instrument not harmed by the space temperature. And all the components are need to be connected to the science part. So to make sure that instrument you are making is actually satisfying the science need, the science requirement. Okay, so now we built the instrument. What's the next step? We want to test them, right? So I will give you some examples, really interesting photos. But other than test them in just enclosed facilities, we often onboard the instrument in different space-like environment. For example, we put them on airplane, we put them on balloon, and we put them on the drone platforms. So you can basically test your instrument in different environment and see. That's the most important thing. It's not just for testing the instrument can work. It's most important to use the test data to see your instrument can meet the science goals. So otherwise, if you make a very good instrument, but it cannot do the original science you're proposing, basically you cannot proceed forward. And the most important thing is actually money. Again, money talks. So we always need to trade off, make decisions, very hard decisions to trade off in order to keep the cost under the budget. Besides, there's always things happen out of nowhere that you never imagined before. So the traceability matrix is a very important thing that we go through throughout the mission, especially the mission designing cycle, to make sure everything can be done, especially the minimum requirement to meet the science goals. So I'll give you some example. For example, the test for space environment at NASA Goddard, where I am working at, they have a huge tank. You can see the little humans here. So compared to the human size, at the top left corner, you can see how big this tank is. And this tank is to mimicking the space environment, so it can be vacuum, can be very cold and emitting a lot of space radiations. And so you can basically test that the instrument can survive the space environment. And another one is very interesting. We invited an orchestra here and try to play beautiful music here. And what's it for? It's actually for acoustic testing. So to test whether the instrument can be vibrated to the frequency, very high frequency, and still remains the quality after vibration test. So it's interesting. And this big instrument is called PACE, which is measuring ocean phytoplankton. And it will be launched next month, really just a few weeks away. And it will be live stream on NASA TV. If you're interested, you can take a look. It will be launched in SpaceX Falcon 9 satellite. So spacecraft. So I'm really looking forward to this instrument. Okay. So the next thing, when I talk about whether we need to test whether it can meet the science goal. So sometimes we launch CubeSat missions, just a little instrument for a space demo, basically to see if we can meet the science goal. So if you still remember what I said at the beginning, where we have an observational gap here, which I plot here is showing you the observational gap and how we feel in the observational gap. So the black line, you can consider it as the truth for the nature, where the cloud ice ranges from very small values, very thin cloud, to the snowfalls, blizzard. And then you can see the purple line is from infrared sensor. It sees the cloud, and the microwave sensor, which sees the large ice, which is the precipitating ice or the snow. And you can see they have a gap. And the red line is from our ice cube, the CubeSat mission, which demonstrated that we can fill in the gap and having some overlap with the other bands. So that's great. And the right panel is also showing you the same thing, but from a like a diagram point of view. So you can see it's really filling the gap of sees through a very deep cloud from the cloud top to the bottom precipitating processes. And this mission, if you look at the size, it's basically just a bread loaf size. So it's a CubeSat mission. It's very successful as in terms of space demo. But of course, the budget is relatively low for a space for the CubeSat. So its quality is not as high, but with more budget, we can make it a better instrument. So the last thing I talk about in this step is the traceability matrix I mentioned before. So for example, for the NASA's next generation, the AOS mission, the Atmospheric Observing System mission, that's a huge flagship mission, and it will carry a lot of instruments. So we need to have a traceability matrix to trace what kind of instrument can measure what kind of physical quantities that we originally proposed to measure. So here, for example, the yellow one, highlighted one, that's the ice water pass. That's the one I mentioned in the previous slide. And the submillimeter radiometers can measure. And not only we showing the what kind of objectives, science objectives we can meet, which is checked here. It's also showing the utility score, basically suggesting how useful this variable is. So if the one is ranked very high, like 4.9 out of 5, this one, then if for some reason we have to cut the budget or the, just the budget increases, then we need to cut something. Then we want to keep as much as these purple ones that's with higher utility scores. So we want to make sure if the mission needs to sacrifice, what things we need to sacrifice at first, and what things we really don't want to step back and sacrifice at all. So that's the traceability matrix that help us to achieve the science goal and make the mission successful. Okay, and then of course you can imagine there's risk associated with any mission. So how do we manage the risk? So inside NASA, there's a risk matrix table, which is just very simple. Here you can see there's a likelihood on the y-axis and there's a consequence on the horizontal axis. So for example, something can be really likely to happen, but it has no consequence, then it still falls in the green, which means it's low risk. And something that's very unlikely to happen, but if it happens, it's catastrophic, then that's in the high risk category. So we want to always evaluate the risk, and the risk assessment happens at every key decision point or as needed as possible. So for some large missions that has a big budget, we really want to prioritize low risk category. So we don't want the mission to fail, right? But for some small budget missions like the CubeSat mission, we can live with, we can be very bold and live with high risk. That's called the high risk, high return mission. So that's the way we advance small technologies, but very important new technologies. And also any human related missions needs to be at low risk at all times, and there's no exceptions because we learned hard lessons like the Columbia disaster. So we never want to sacrifice or putting humans' life into risk. Okay, so I'm gonna come back to the submillimeter radiometers that I'm working on. So I'm gonna tell you about the true story of an unsuccessful radiometer mission. So before the AOS mission, I just talked about the flagship mission, there was this A train. Basically, you can see how we fly a bunch of different instruments along the same orbit, just a few minutes or a few seconds separated apart. So they're focusing, each of them are focusing, measure different components of the atmosphere. Some of them on aerosol, some of them on cloud, some of them on polluted gas. And then we can achieve different science goals. So one of the submillimeter was originally proposed to fly together on the CloudSat mission. Okay, so CloudSat is a radar. So eventually we have to decommission that submillimeter radiometer, and it was never flew on it, unfortunately. So we have several reasons why we want to decommission that and don't fly it. So the first one is that it's a relatively mid-low priority at that time for the science motivation. We just want to fill in the observational gap. Okay, and the second question, second thing, a justification is an instrument, which is this one, the yellow one, the Aura MILs. That's an instrument that's measuring atmospheric gas, but it has a similar frequency band. So people argue, well, you have an instrument that's flying sub-millimeter band, so why do you want another one? So that's a justification. And also because it's flying with the radar, and the radar is super expensive, so they don't want to delay the mission by integrating different payloads onto one mission. That's risky. And also, if the mission is delayed, you could imagine the cost must increase, right? So that's a lot of justification based on different perspectives that eventually lead to the decision that we don't want to fly the sub-millimeter radiometers. So how do we revive it? After I joined this group, okay, so we used a previous NASA data and try to come up with new science. And during that process, we find a brilliant way that it can actually tell the ice microphysics from a sub-millimeter band, because we find sub-millimeter polarimetric, which is the polarized signal, is very sensitive to ice particles, shape, and orientation. So here I give an example. So one is a horizontally polarized wave, one is a vertically polarized wave. And if they're propagating through one plate particle, or you could imagine a very flat snowflake, if the snowflake is horizontally floating in the air, then you could imagine different wave. The horizontal wave would think this is a big flat hexagon. But the vertical polarized wave would think, okay, this is just a very thin rectangle, right? So they see different things. So by difference in them, we can actually tell what shape the particle is and what size it is and what orientation it is. And all of those matter for the eventual precipitation, because imagine if you have a big snowflake that's wobbling down, it's going to take a long time, right? And it's a very beautiful snow that's suitable for skiing. Versus if it's a gravel, then it's going to fall down very quickly and also bring economic loss, right? So you really want to know the ice microphysics details. So we wrote a series of papers that actually reignite interest from the science community about the sub-millimeter band. So now we have another perspective to justify why we want to fly the sub-millimeter band. And here I just show you the difficulty measuring the snow microphysics from space, because snow particle is so small that you couldn't even see the structure when it fall on your hand, right? Versus satellite footprint size is usually at least as big as a football field. So how do you measure a snow particle from far away that's footprint size as big as a football field? So we need to come up with different ideas. And very importantly, technology is ready. At the time when we decommissioned for our sub-millimeter center, we don't have a very good technology to miniaturize, and we don't have qualified polarized lens to actually make the polarized measurement. So nowadays we are ready. Here I'm just showing you the miniaturization. So here is the one that's called the NOAA JPSS satellite that's flying right now. And you can see how big it is compared to the small people just working by the side. And there's an instrument called the ATMS, which is on board the satellite. So you could roughly estimate how big it is. Roughly how big it is. But now with new technology, we can miniaturize this. So this is Steve Rising, one of the colleagues in the Colorado State, and he's making it into a desktop size. Okay, and then Dr. Wu, I just showed previously, we can further miniaturize it and into a bread loaf size. So you can imagine the cost is reduced tremendously. And also the polarized filter is ready now. They have technique. So everything is ready. So basically we're the right people doing the things at the right time, at the right place. So that's why we got the POSER mission got funded last year. That's a new science NASA mission, and making a measurement at the sub-millimeter band. And we use a polarized wave, try to not only get the ice water pass and try to fill the observational gap, but also measure the microphysics and try to understand the snowfall processes. So that's a very exciting mission that we're working on right now. Hopefully it can survive until being launched and get the science back. Okay, now, so everything get tested, the science meet the requirement and the budget is within the range, now we can launch it. And after launch, it's of course operation and get the data, right? And I'm showing you this diagram, basically just different phase. We call it different terminology within NASA, but basically showing you the same thing with the previous figure. From pre-phase A, which is born of the science idea, and phase A, basically how scientists and engineers work together to develop the concept and trade-off matrix. And then we move to the building the instruments and design, and then eventually launch them and operate them and get data and try to do the science, okay? Of course, there are other things playing in this cycle. So application, education, and outreach are all playing a very big role in the entire mission life cycle. So we want to make the science to be useful, to be accessible, to be interesting, and engaging and inspiring new generation scientists and engineers. So here in NASA, recent years, we have the top, which is the open science. We want to make the science data and as well as the codes and softwares accessible by anybody in the world. And there's downstream accessibility challenges that application team want to overcome by developing like apps, help the users to actually use the NASA data instead of just putting it there, let the scientists do all the things and that's it. No, we don't want to do it like this. We want to make it accessible by everybody and be really useful by people and connect the science to the general public. Okay, so now let me summarize by the mission team organization before I end my talk. So here is the mission team organization. It's not important to understand the detailed organization, but I just want to emphasize that different component is irreplaceable part if you want to make a healthy mission. Here, I just put the analogy to the human body. So the principal investigator is the brain, basically the brain to control the body. And then the engineers are building your muscles, building your bones, building the entire body. Spacecraft is the feet for you to actually be able to run into space. And system integration and the technology part is basically integrate every engineer part together to make it into a successful payload. And then we want to launch them, right? And also there are very important things. For example, the ground system, they're the eyes. They want to, we need to receive the data and analyze the data. So we need ground system to actually continuously importing the data and store the data and distribute the data. And also there's an extremely important one is called the Chief Safety and Mission Assurance Office. That's our immune system, if I could compare. Basically make sure your body is working, is functioning, always functioning healthily and not ill post. So we can have a very safe and accomplished mission. And very importantly, we have a project supporting office, which basically manage all the money, manage the budget, manage how we spend the money. So if, for example, if you are very interested in managing money, and we, of course, we're not all of us, most of us are not billionaires or millionaires. We don't have that much money for ourselves, but we can, if you're really interested and sensitive to money, maybe you want to work with the budget office and try to oversee the mission, because the success of the mission is really depending on how you spend the taxpayers' money, right? So every part of this component is irreplaceable. And lastly, I'm going to touch upon the personal skills that are needed for a project scientist. That's actually a lot of requirement that you could start to build at a really young age. And when you expose to different people, different projects, you can start to build your techniques or expertise in different areas. So the project scientist, as I mentioned, is the brain of the mission, right? So they need to interface with different people. So project scientist needs to be the one that can persuade people to, especially the Congress or the upper management, to actually invest. in your mission, right? So here, let's consider the James Webb Telescope. This slide was taken, credit from Krista, our Earth Science Division Chief. And the James Webb's mission, the project scientist is John Wiener. He's a Nobel Prize winner for physics in the physics category. So his name itself is kind of like very convincing for the Congress to give NASA this mission, to approve this mission, right? But during the whole process, you're encountering a lot of things. So for example, he needs to interact with the science team to continuously inspire collaborations, broader science community, make them aware, and working groups to report and consensus building for science trades, and also the communicate science to the general public, and also to the headquarters and to the Congress. And they need to interface with different project components. For example, the engineer team, they need to work in science trades, the trade-off matrix, the performance modeling and integration, the project management team to advocate for science, of course, and the center management team to report and strategize, because a big mission easily eats the center's budget. So center, for example, the Goddard Center needs to balance between large missions and small missions to make a balanced portfolio. And of course, they need to interact with headquarters, right, to report gateway reviews and science advocacy, because headquarters really want to have a successful mission. And of course, they also have a standing review board to make sure everything goes on correctly in the correct timeline. And also, they have independent review board that has nothing to do with your team, with your mission, with your project, but they stand at the third person point of view to make sure that your science and your engineer, everything is going on the right track. So that's also extremely important. Okay, so let me come back to the mission life cycle. Okay, so now we're done with all the things, and I think I'm good in time. Yeah, and now come back to the poster story, or the sublimiter radiometers. So we used the A-train data a lot, especially the Aura MS data. If you still remember, we are decommissioned in the last round because one of the sensors is flying a similar channel. And that sensor was not designed to measure cloud ice at all. Nobody expected to actually measure cloud ice, but we derive cloud ice information from that sensor. And fortunately, that sensor also has polarized filter. So actually, all the science we inspire here for the ice microphysics measurement is actually mostly comes from that one and from another mission called GPM mission. So how about when we try to answer the science question we originally proposed, we inspire new science ideas and put that into a new mission. And isn't that the best circle for circulation, the mission life cycle? So I think that's a truly successful story that's wandering in some years, but eventually we make it successful as far as now. But of course, it's not flying yet. So we don't know what's going to happen, but keep fingers crossed that it's going to fly. And I wish you the best for the NEBP as well, just to advance the science and answer the questions and make new questions, So thank you, and really appreciate.
Thank you, Dr. Gong. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we have some time for questions. Folks can either put a question in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. I have a question maybe while people are thinking of their own questions, and maybe if you want to stop sharing, Dr. Gong, sure, so that we can just see everyone a little bit bigger. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's better.
So my question is, you described how you came to Goddard in 2012 and then became a civil servant in 2022. I don't think probably a lot of the students on the call know the difference. Can you just describe a little bit about the difference of, working at NASA Goddard and then what it means to be a civil servant?
Oh, okay, that's a really good question. So at Goddard, at different places, it's different. I just have experience with Goddard and JPL, so I can say about the Goddard system. In the science division that I'm working with, uh, uh, usually the civil servants are the ones like the big PIs that actually try to capture new missions or make the mission successful or bridge out into a big areas, expertise areas, basically make new directions or sustain new directions and make it more broader, engage larger science community, doing better science. So that's a relatively higher or mature, I would say, role for the civil servant. And of course, one person cannot do everything, right? Once you start to develop new project idea, new directions, you need people, talented people to work with you and develop new things. So that's why we hire contractors or co-op scientists. Co-op scientists are their affiliations are with universities in the local or in other areas, and they just basically work as a scientist and helping you, and they develop their own career path. And if their career path were seeing value for NASA, then one day they may want to become a civil servant. So that's how, when I advanced my career, I found, okay, that's a good match for what I'm doing with what NASA wants to do. So that's why I apply and really looking forward to brand new directions.
Wonderful, thank you. It looks like there's a couple of questions in the chat. You could read them, Ji, or I could read them if you want.
I can't see the questions. I see a lot of
Okay, I can read them. The first one is, what advice would you give undergraduates navigating their own science paths right now?
Oh, okay, I can see the questions now. Sorry. What kind of advice? Yeah, so I think first thing is to be open-minded. Life is a continuously learning new things. So never sit with your comfort zone. That's what I would pose. No matter your comfort zone in terms of the things that you already technologies or techniques that you already familiar with or very confident to do, but also explore new technologies, techniques that you've never done before. Maybe you can sparkle new interdisciplinary ideas. Okay, so that's one thing to stay to go out of a comfort zone. And another thing is a lot of us, including my son, when in STEM field, usually you want to work with your own idea and stay there, right? But you want to step out of your comfort zone and talk with as many people as wanted. Especially, I would think for PI or if you want to do a really successful project, the first thing is to become a businessman, put yourself into a business role and try to get money, right? So persuade people to advocate for you is especially important. And that's not only through publishing paper or presentations, but also through interacting with different people from different backgrounds. Let them know your story, let them see the value of your story, right? And sell your story out. That's very important. And you can make new friends that will contribute to your project at some day. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. The next one is, does NASA offer any internship programs for international students who don't have US citizenship?
Well, if you search intern.nasa.gov, you could see maybe you can email me and I can share the link. But there is one category that's if there is an existing collaboration between US and other governments, then there's possibility for international for international interns. But I personally never done that before, so I don't know the exact process, but I could point you to the right person if you email me.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add to that, because so I direct the Montana Space Grant, and if you don't know, there's a space grant in every state, plus DC and Puerto Rico, so there's opportunities all over. So while most of the NASA internship opportunities are for citizens, there's definitely lots of opportunities, you know, working for the other companies that also work with NASA. So there's lots of, you know, space opportunities and things like that where you can do different internships, but isn't like paid through NASA because we
Yes.
do on most of the NASA internships have a citizenship requirement, but there's lots of other opportunities also.
Right, exactly. And thank you, Marisa, for putting in the link. That's the link I was talking about. And thank you, Angela, for pointing out to other avenues. Yes, for example, universities, they hire interns to do, especially if non-sensitive technology or science, they welcome, and they universities always you know, very I couldn't say very, but relatively flexible in terms of hiring international students. Yeah.
Great. And then maybe you can see it, but there's another question. What can undergraduates do now to build the skills and leadership needed for the creations of different missions and ideas in the field? I think you kind of answered that a little bit with the undergrad question, but maybe they're looking a little bit more for leadership ideas.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, for undergrad, my personal experience is undergrad is relatively less exposed to research experience. But the very important thing is, no matter what kind of experience you're exposed to, the opportunities is for you actually to look for and seek for, right? I always think one thing from Abraham Lincoln says very well, and I like it. So he said that if you want to know your future, the best way to do it is to create it. So if you proactively looking for opportunities, like participate in the NEBP and try to launch a balloon, or try to, you know, talk to people and try to manage a successful launch, even it's a test run. I think that's something you should be proud of, and you can write it into your resume, and it becomes part of your experience that could be useful in the future, right? So a lot of times it depending, not just waiting for the project to fall on you, but rather seeking for opportunities. I would say that's a very important thing for undergraduate to be starting to, you know, to build your career. And also during the time, you not only gain the leadership experience, but also you getting to know more people, right? And you will find that their ideas are inspiring to yourself as well, and maybe you could collaborate, you know, making it into bigger things. Yeah.
And that made me think, just as a follow-on as well, to make sure for all of the students who are listening, that you understand that this project is a NASA-sponsored project. And so make sure to put that on your resume as you're going to your next step, whether it be onto further education or for a job, or looking for an internship or something like that, because you should definitely take advantage of saying that you were part of a NASA project, but also trying to describe and put the skills and things that you're learning through the project, name them and figure out how to describe them on your resume, because that'll help you to the next step. And the more that you're able to do of hands-on kind of real world experience will help you get to the next step, and then to build forward.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Any other questions before we close out today?
Hello, I have a question, if you guys can hear me.
Yeah.
First, I just want to say thank you for that presentation. That was awesome. And also, I would like to ask sort of a question that's kind of out there. So I know that when we're sending people to Mars, they may be exposed to like cosmic radiation or anything else like that. And I believe that ice is one of the best like ideas that they have for insulating the astronauts that are going soon. Do you have any information on that? I guess. I'm sorry, I just wanted to know.
Oh, well, that's a tough question for me. I don't personally work on any planetary science mission, so I'm afraid I couldn't answer
Okay.
your question. But the thing I would put my perspective is a lot of things we originally designed for Earth has an applicability to other planets. For example, the thermometer we're working on right now. One of the application area is to measuring the ice from Moon, because Moon at the polar region, they have deposited ice. And also Mars, if you know the Mars, the polar region also have deposited ice. And thermometer is a great band to actually be really sensitive to those ice. So that's one of the justification that we propose our mission as well. So maybe one day, you know, any new technology we develop one day, they will be useful for other mission. You will never know. You know, that's my answer. Sorry, I don't know more details about that.
Thank you. So I think we're approaching towards the
No,
end of our.
it's totally okay. I'm sorry that question was kind of. I just wanted to ask somebody who's on.
Great. Yeah. So I think we're approaching the end of our time. Let's thank Dr. Gong again. Thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I did want to say I'm going to stop the recording, but then anyone who would like to stay on, if you have a question, if Dr. Gong has a few more minutes, but you didn't want to
Yes.
ask a question on the recording or something with other people around, we can keep the session open a little bit and you can ask a question. So we'll keep it open a little bit, but I'm going to stop the recording, and if you need to go, then you can. And
Yeah.
thanks again so much, Dr. Gong.
Yeah, thanks again for joining.